What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. If you want to support me, you can now support me on Patreon. That's not only a solid way to support the channel, but it also gives you more say in what deck techs I covered. Using the TCGplayer link in the description down below, or as always just liking, commenting, subscribing is also a solid option. Now let's get into today's deck tech with Will Kinrith. And honestly, this guy's busted. All we have to do is use some niche cards like Chaplain's Blessing, gain 5 life, and then boom, out of nowhere, all of our blue and white spells are going to cost 5 less mana. Now this can be incredibly busted, especially when we throw stuff in there like Approach to the Second Sun. Now this is one of the cheapest ways we can win in the deck, but it is honestly too good not to include. You go ahead and cast this for one white half the time, and then you can easily use something like Pull from Tomorrow, dig through time, dig 7 cards deep, grab it back into your hand, and win the very same turn. It's honestly busted. Like I said, it does feel a little cheap, but hey, the commander's powerful, so why don't we use it, especially in a budget build. Now, another thing we can do is just create a massive board state, whether we're using the finale or we're just using, this thing that makes a ton of Pegasuses. We are going to go ahead and close out the game through combat damage. So if that sounds like a deck tech you want to get into, let's get into it. Let's kick it off by going over all of the useful life gain spells we can abuse with this commander. Rest for the Weary. This is amazing because as long as a land entered the battlefield this turn, it's going to gain you a solid 8 life and reduce all of your spells by 8. Sunspring Expedition. Now, the cons to this card is your opponents are going to see it coming from a mile away, so it might be a little hard to get off sometimes, but if it does, it can win you the game on the spot. Gaining 8 life is massive, especially when you don't have to spend any mana to do so. You just have to sacrifice the enchantment. Chaplain's Blessing, this one's super efficient, 1 mana, gain 5 life, solid. Sunbeam, Spellbomb, kind of similar, 1 mana, 5 life, that's where we want to be. Elixir of Immortality, not as good, but hey, it's still only 2 mana to reduce all of your spells by 5 mana. That's still amazing for the very, very low investment. White Sun's Passage, just a simple 2 mana, 5 life. Light of Hope, pretty flexible, we can use it to get rid of an enchantment or, gain 4 life for 1 mana, not as efficient, but hey, it's still amazing in the deck. Heliod's Intervention and Sanguine Sacrament. Now these cards are most useful when we pair them with our untapping shenanigans. That way we can gain a ton of life with our already reduced X spells, reducing either Heliod's Intervention or Sanguine Sacrament, and then we can tap our commander again to really catapult us away, maybe gain 30 plus life, and then at that point it won't be hard to draw our library and then Approach to the Second Sun, win the game. Conclave Phalanx. Now this is one of those niche cards that can be very explosive in this deck. There's a lot of scenarios where we will end up with a massive board state with a lot of our X spells just creating, a ton of creatures. So now we get a free spell that gains us life because of that Convoke ability, and then again we'll get our solid life gain outlet to start storming off if we need another turn to close out the game. Renewed Faith, 6 life for 3 mana, not really where we want to be, but it is definitely going to put in work. Dragskull Reaver is also going to be super solid in the deck. Not only are you going to draw a card whenever you gain life, which he does have lifelink and double strike, so you will gain 2 cards off of him, he will consistently gain us 6 life. As long as we can untap with this guy, we are definitely going to close out the game pretty quickly. Moving on, let's talk about how this deck is going to win the game. We have Finale of Glory. This is an amazing card. All we need to do is make sure that we pump at least 10 into X, which is not going to be hard in this deck, and then we're going to add a total of 60 power to the board. Scenarios like this is why we run Crashing Drawbridge, that way we can give them haste and immediately kill everybody. Stormherd is also an incredibly explosive card in the deck that could really win us the game as soon as we cast it, and honestly we could be looking at casting this card as soon as turn 4 or 5 with the right setup. Martial Coup and White Sun's Twilight are also pretty solid game enders that wipe the board. Now honestly these ones aren't as explosive as the other ones, but imagine White Sun's Twilight for 10. If someone doesn't put up any blockers, we can definitely infect them out as soon as next turn. Secure the Waste is just another solid X spell that can give us some blockers, make sure we're going wide, and honestly can end the game in the right scenario. Nykthos is that scenario because in this deck we aren't gaining small increments of life, no, we're gaining a lot of life all at once, so he's an amazing card in this deck that can buff our guys to the moon and make sure that we're swinging with some pretty lethal threats. Baldin Sentry Herdmaster can turn all of our X spells into lethal threats. Filling our hand up will now buff our entire board state. This can easily buff all of our creatures plus 10 and make it to where we're swinging for the win out of nowhere. There is also a way to generate infinite mana in this deck using Peregrine Drake and Capsize. Now, Peregrine Drake is mostly in the deck just because I noticed the thing we run out of the most in this deck is colored mana. So just the fact that we can play this guy, untap 5 lands, get the colored mana we need to win the game is solid. And then the fact that we can just go infinite with it is also just another plus. And last but not least, we have Approach to the Second Sun. There's a ton of X spells and even Dig Through Time in this deck, so getting 7 cards deep is not going to be difficult, especially if we have a way to untap our commander. Then the 7 life we gain off of Approach will even get added to our reduction, making it to where we can dig even deeper. That way we have some protection just in case someone has a counter spell. Let's talk about some of the ways we can untap our commander. First we have Chakram. This guy's incredibly broken in the deck because while we're storming off, we're going to be able to untap our commander, tap him again, and this will effectively just double the amount our spells are reduced. I mean, think about it. 5 life is kind of the low end of this deck, so being able to just cast 1 additional spell and make it to where all our spells are reduced by 10 can be incredibly broken. Retreat to Coralhelm is also incredibly easy to set off. All we have to do is play a land and boom, we can untap our commander, tap him again, and do the exact same thing. Teferi Temporal Archmage. Now, I like this guy because not only can he untap our commander, he can untap our lands. And again, remember, I said the one thing this deck kind of runs into is we run out of colored mana extremely fast. So having something to untap our lands can be extremely useful in this deck. Reality Spasm. Again, not only can this untap our colored mana, making it to where we can cast what we need to, it can also untap our commander. Kelpie Guide, just a simple tap it, untap our commander. Turnabout can either untap our commander, but let's be honest, 9 times out of 10, we're going to spend 2 mana to untap all of our lands. Pour Over the Pages draws us some cards, untaps some lands. And Frantic Search, again, 1 mana essentially, and then we're going to untap 3 lands. Pretty busted. Moving on to card advantage, we have Mind Spring, Pull from Tomorrow, and Silver Scrutiny as our more efficient X spells that draw us cards. We then have Stroke of Genius and Ingenious Mastery. I kind of like these ones a little bit better though, because we only have to spend 1 blue pip on them. And remember, like I said, colored mana is your best friend in this deck. Blue Sun Zenith and Commander's Insight along with Diviner's Portent are going to be the costly ones that cost 3 blue. Now, these ones can be kind of difficult to get off sometimes, but again, it's worth it for how deep these cards can dig us. Sphinx's Revelation is not only going to give us a break on the blue pips, but it's also going to gain us a lot of life. So in a scenario where we can untap our commander, boom, again, we're gaining more life, reducing our cards even more. Breakthrough. Now, this one's pretty solid, especially if we can gain 7 life in a turn. Then it reads draw 4 cards for 1 mana and then discard to hand size. Not that bad. Days Undoing, super solid, super cheap, and it's just basically a wheel effect that will shuffle your library, which we don't really care about in this deck. Dig Through Time, again, this is mostly in the deck just to dig us really deep, make sure we flesh out our hand, and again, it can grab that Approach to the Second Sun. Thirst for Discovery is in here just so not all of our card draw spells are X spells, and we have something to cast early game. Moving on to ramp, we have Wayfarer's Bauble, rerun both of the signets. We have the Talisman, Marble Diamond, Sky Diamond, we even run Fellowar Stone. We also do run Gilded Lotus, which might be a head scratcher here, but honestly, it's perfect for those triple pips that we need to cast our X spells. Additionally, remember, we do run out of colored mana, so anything that produces colored mana in this deck is going to be our friend. High Tide, again, this is going to be amazing at creating additional blue mana, that way we can cast those X spells relatively easily. Midnight Clock not only can add blue mana to our mana pool, but it can also fetch us a new grip once we get enough hour counters on this card. And last but not least, we have Soul Ring. Moving on to our interaction, we do have a small counterspell package with Arcane Denial, Counterspell, and Negate. I've always loved Curse of the Swine because it exiles, so it's going to be amazing at getting rid of all of our opponent's threats. Swords to Plowshares, now there is scenarios where you will cast this on your own creatures if they're big enough to gain you a lot of life, but 9 times out of 10, again, you're just taking out your opponent's creatures that you want to get rid of. Austere Command is an incredibly useful and flexible board wipe, and then we have Fumigate. The life gain is kind of useless because our commander's dead, but hey, we're on theme here. That's going to do it for the deck tech, guys. Don't forget to follow me on Moxville. It's the best and easiest way for you to copy these deck lists, tweak them to your own liking. Maybe you want to buff this deck up and go beyond budget, using Moxfield can be a solid way to do that. I am also on a long grind to become one of the most followed people on Moxfield, so you also would be helping me out with that. And as always, guys, thank you for watching. I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavors, and I will see you in the next one.